I want to welcome you to my conversation with Mike de Gagnier. Mike is a wonderfully talented and accomplished person. He is a member of the Northwest Angle 37 First Nations people in Ontario, Canada. He currently serves as president and CEO of Indspire, and that's INDSPIRE, a national Indigenous charity that invests in the education of First Nations people. He was the seventh president and vice chancellor of Nipissing University in North Bay, Ontario, the first First Nations person to become the president of a Canadian university. So welcome, Mike. A pleasure to have you here. We have so much to talk about.
Thank you very much. That's very gracious of you.
Can you just, first of all, describe the Talking Circle and tell me and tell our viewers what this Talking Circle represents in both psychologically and within the governance of Indigenous people?
Maybe I'll describe what it isn't. And so when Indigenous people are famously consulted on just about everything, and in part because we insist on it, but in part because governments and others have taken it upon themselves to say, well, you know, if the Indigenous people are concerned about the fact that they're never asked about what happens with their lives, we'll ask them about everything. And so I picture, as I have sat through many times before, some sort of an announcement that comes out in a small community that says, company XYZ or department XYZ of the government is here to ask us about a new proposal they have for a project that they'd like to fund. And anyone who's interested in this, come to the community hall on Tuesday night and join us for a discussion. And there is a table set up at the front where government officials will sit. And then there's chairs sat out and a pot of coffee on the back and a few boxes of donuts. And then everybody gets a chance to go to the microphone and speak their piece. And so there is this sense that this is what consultation is, that I have something that I've designed and I'd like your comments on what I've designed. This is not a partnership. This isn't, because if it was a partnership, this product would be something that we both own. It's not co-created, it's not co-developed. It is something that you bring to me as a government, and I sit in the audience and I comment on it. And you sometimes use my commentary as a way to inform or slightly change this program or this piece of paper that you have. And you go off to whatever government mechanisms that you're enmeshed in and say, all right, I've consulted, I've made a few changes based on what the wants and needs are of this community, and now I'm going to move forward. So there's a sense of a table at the front and Indigenous people facing this table, something that's already been designed by someone else from afar, and our capacity to talk to them and maybe get some changes and maybe not. A circle is something quite different, and it suggests, I think, a couple of things right off the bat, and that is the idea that what is created by that circle, the discussion that we are creating at that circle, is not us commenting on someone else's work. It's the idea of co-creation. We are creating together an idea that is formed from the contributions of everyone sitting at that circle, no matter how small or large. So we're not coming to this circle with a set of conditions that we'd like to meet or a previously created solution that we'd like to have validated. We are all of us sitting in the circle, starting from scratch. We are all of us going to create something that is unique from a combination of what we all have to say. We begin this in a good way. These things are always directed by an elder that is acknowledged and respected by whatever community you find yourself in. And that elder situates us all as we sit in this circle where our hearts and minds are all sort of going in the same direction. And whether or not you're, whatever culture, indigenous culture you're coming from, it often has something to do with acknowledging the fact that we put all of those negative thoughts aside. We put our burdens to the side. We treat all of you, we treat each other with respect, and we come to this circle all as equals and all with the capacity to make a contribution to some collective outcome. So that's important. I think the other part to really emphasize is the idea of equality. We are equal in this. I may only have 5 words to offer, or I may have a story to offer that requires interpretation, or I may be an authority on this subject. But regardless, when we're in this circle, we've agreed, all of us, to come as equals with, our open hearts and minds, and each make our contribution. Even in silence is a contribution as well. So we have that equality, and then this idea of reciprocity, that we give to each other, we take from each other, and I need to respect the contributions of others, and they need to respect mine as well, so that there's no judgment about whether or not your comment was a good or a bad one, or strong or weak. It represents your views and your unique vision of the problem or the opportunity that we're discussing. So that's the beauty of the circle. It defies, I think, conventional definitions around consultation. It even defies, I think, conventional ideas around partnership. It is, I think, from its earliest incarnations, this idea of co-creation of something that our individual minds can't conceive, but our collective minds can. And I think it makes a contribution to this whole idea of collective thought and collectivity that Indigenous people are renowned for.
So what does it do psychologically to the band? Does it make people feel as if their governance is more democratic? Does it make them feel as if their voice really counts? What happens after everybody has expressed himself? And let me just ask you this. I was going to say him and herself. In talking circles, typically, were women involved too?
Oh, it would have to be, that would be a cultural thing in some, I think in some longhouse traditions, perhaps out west, that there would be designated speakers for each family, and so those would necessarily at the time have been male. I'm sitting here in the traditional territory of the Mohawks, the Mohawk people, the 6 nations of the Grand River, and a proudly, strongly matriarchal system. So women may have informed, may have consulted amongst themselves and informed the speaker, who may be male, who will speak on behalf of other ideas. So sometimes you have women involved, sometimes you have men, and I think more traditionally now, those people that are invested in this, in the discussion, maybe male or female, or two-spirited, in other words, from the LGBTQ community, all of them are equal and contributors to the process.
You described beautifully the talking circle. I want to ask you, and this is sort of stretching it a bit, but we live, and I'm now speaking, as an American, as a naturalized American, an immigrant American with an English accent, but I would like you to comment on how this concept of the talking circle might help a divided country.
Talking circles, I would say, create something in the space between. If you can picture all of these chairs, and there's something that is created in the space between by individual equal contributions to a common idea. And so when we think back to Western ways of doing things. We think, for example, of the indigenous boarding school phenomena, the Indian residential schools, Indian boarding school system in the United States, where, or in your own experience with boarding schools in the British sense of them. This was sort of an industrialization model applied to education, right? We were all driven into schools that were actually remarkably similar in the way they looked, the way they felt, the way they were taught. And in a way, it stamped upon our minds a certain way of being educated and a certain way of being in the world and understanding the world. So it was this industrial model of education, strict discipline, an overlay of religion, and a certain way of understanding the world and its traditions. And out from the other end comes all of these folks, who from the boarding schools, whether Indian or otherwise, that had come out of an industrial idea of education. Talking circles seem to sort of set that idea on its head, because it's almost like a deindustrialization of developing ideas and co-creating ideas, where every single individual's ideas or notions or experiences or ways of the world are equal and can be contributed to a collective understanding. And so I think it tears apart this idea of industrialization of thinking, and gets us back to individual thoughts in a circle or in a construct where there isn't any judgment, and everybody gets to say what they want, and everybody gets to contribute the stories that they have to tell.